to know before you draft. That and more this week on the couch. Got Chris Harris here. Chris, when I say, what do you need to tell the people? What do they need to know before they draft their fantasy football team? What pops into your head?
That I wish I'd had more than 30 seconds of prep.
Yeah.
I'm such a jerk. Why am I such a mean guest?
Oh, I mean, we all have to. This on the couch, we're already veering off, right? On the couch, and I love Matthew Berry. I had Matthew Berry on for the most on the couch episode of On the Couch ever, when he just talked about how it is to be Matthew Berry and everything goes into that. And I wish him lots of great success at NBC. So there's a layer to this, which is fantasy football and helping people win, but there's a layer of this where we're hanging out and getting to know each other. And I originally on the couch, I had a word association segment, so we could do a word association segment.
No, I think I was on that show.
Yeah.
I mean, do we need to spend some time getting to know each other, considering we've known each other for
it's true.
Like
it's
10
true.
years?
Absolutely. But we're getting down to the nitty gritty. I guess the urgency of that question indicates like we're getting down to the nitty gritty. There's not a time to dither anymore. We actually have to commit. So when it comes to things you're ready to commit to, what are the commitments?
I think it's really wonky. The first thing that snaps into my head is positional strategy and realizing for me anyway, that running back and wide receiver have just diverged to such a huge degree positionally that I feel more of an urgency this year than I ever remember to try to go running back early and feel like I can find solutions for wide receiver later, which I know is not necessarily du jour. It's not necessarily like the zero RB people are screaming at me, but like wide receiver 30 still makes me smile, and he might not have the potential to be wide receiver 1, but I'm pretty sure he's going to be okay. And running back 30 makes me want to scream running into the hills. So the first thing that I guess maybe the first thing that pops into my head is at least I want people to think positional strategy before they go into their rooms and think about like, all right, are you comfortable with the idea that if you go wide receiver in the first round, it's going to look like this in the fourth round, et cetera?
Yes. I'm working on my draft day game plan. It's like the large overarching article. I'm going to get it out today before the end of business. And I think flexibility, it's funny to do this big circle and say the most important thing to be committed to is not be committed to anything too much, but understand the landscape at each position so that as your draft unfolds and you're reacting in the moment, you understand like a choose your own adventure or a flow chart. Oh, did you take 2 running backs in your first 2 picks? Now you need to know who you like best out of these wide receivers that are going in the 3rd and 4th round. And that's really what I try to capture. Not so much make sure you take these players in these rounds, but make sure you understand where your hot spots are in different positions. So, maybe Travis Kelce falls to you at the 10th pick, maybe he doesn't. And then you understand how your drafts diverge based on that. But what's really interesting when I step back and look at that, Chris, and again, this is where I was saying before we went on the air, it's comforting. It's always comforting to spend time with Chris, as I just got to do his show last week, because us old heads, you don't have a beard, so you're not a gray beard, but us gray beards that have been around here for a while, we've seen a lot, right? We've seen a lot in the fantasy football world change. You mentioned zero running back. It was do the opposite. It was upside down. Matt Waldman and Paul Charchian talked about this decades ago, this strategy, and it became more of a dominant strategy in terms of the way people thought about it. But because of that then caused ADP to shift, right? So what's wild about this is we're in this hive mind, very fluid situation where every year the landscape changes at each position. Remember a couple of years back, there was that year that all the wide receivers disappointed. And then that affects the landscape the next year. But it seems like if you're just reacting to what happened last year, you're with the masses. And it's really thinking about, when we look back, what should we have done? And I think that you're right to hit on the divergence of wide receiver and running back. Although I love, maybe I'm just like used to going to the clearance rack, and that great satisfaction that comes with getting something that's marked 50% off. I'd love the running backs in this 5th to 10th round range. I think we might be losing AJ Dillon out of that group, but I'd like those running backs. And I like the wide receivers, like you mentioned, wide receiver 30, like wide receiver 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th round looks really, really good. So I'm kind of I think they call it hero running back. That's what the kids came up with, where you take your one running back early and then you throw some darts later on. But when you say, hey, running back, I'm much more comfortable with the later wide receivers than running backs. Give me a running back or two who you're willing to commit on, have high confidence, and make one of those cornerstones of your team in the early rounds.
Well, I don't have an answer of everybody who I probably have 8 running backs ranked in my first round, so any of them. I do want.
I'll give you an either or kind of situation here, right? So if somebody draws, say like the 8th or 9th pick, right?
Right.
They're going to be looking at some combination of like Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, Najee Harris. Is there a name that stands out there? And I say this because when folks read my draft day game plan, I absolutely equivocate and say, hey, there's about 3 players you should consider here. I might consider this one, but they're all worthy of the spot anyway.
I mean, I've never been the biggest Derrick Henry proponent in the world, but I think he's a top 3, 4 pick in every format. So if you're telling me I'm picking 8 and Derrick Henry's there, I would rush. I would rush to the podium and do Derrick Henry. But like, I love Dalvin Cook there. I like Joe Mixon. I like Alvin Kamara there, to be honest. I think maybe that's starting to become more of a consensus opinion. I want an excuse to take a first round running back. And I kind of want an excuse to take a second round running back, although if I'm picking early enough in the first round, by the time it gets around to me later in the second round, I might be apt not to be able to do that. It feels like these drafts I've done lately, we're all doing a million drafts. I keep getting smacked at like late first round. So I get kind of my pick of the next running back coming back around the other way. So I might get Mixon and Kamara. And I love that as a start. And going back to what you said about running backs, the kind of lottery ticket running backs from rounds 5 through 10, sure. My problem is the running back that I can get in like rounds 3 and 4, where I have to rely on them to be starters. And I'm like, okay, cool. Come on in, Elijah Mitchell. I'm sure you'll be amazing, and it's not like you can't take him there, but man, I feel relying on the running back that I get in round 4, Antonio Gibson, to be maybe he won't be there much longer, but like that's the neighborhood we're talking about.
Right.
Running back 22, 23, 24, boy, those guys scare me as fantasy starters, but I'm with you. Like running back 30, even though Ramondre Stevenson is, scary and doesn't have a job all to himself or whatever, but just the cost isn't going to cost me a starting spot. So I'm way more excited to take the chance on the upside.
Yeah, like give me 3 running backs in that running back 25 to 40, 45 range, and I feel confident one of them will work out. And then you can incorporate that in. And you mentioned the 3rd and 4th round running backs, and I think that is where there is a divergence, right? Because when you're talking about 3rd round wide receivers, you're talking about A.J. Brown, Michael Pittman, Cortland Sutton. I mean, these are all guys that have in their range of outcomes like top 5 or 7 at the position finishes. Running back Nick Chubb, I like Nick Chubb a lot, but
me too.
At the same time, and I think the fact that you're getting a round plus discount on him is something that you might want to take advantage of. But I don't see a range of outcomes for Nick Chubb where he's a top 5 or 7 running back. James Conner,
that hurts.
Ezekiel Elliott.
Do you have like a paddles? I mean, Nick Chubb's kind of like one of my sons, so.
I love Nick Chubb. What I'm trying to say is I don't have a fear of missing out on Nick Chubb's career year that's going to like go so greatly surpass what. And I love look. I like Nick Chubb.
His career year would be a top 5
right
thing, though. Like, and you don't have to spend a top 5 pick to get him. So,
but with Jacoby Brissett, and there's still a chance that Jimmy Garoppolo is the starter. There's a chance if they can wait out the release, and that's the whole league is just waiting for the 49ers to release Garoppolo.
Draft after August 30th.
Right.
That's all I can say.
No, it's fair. I mean, and this is a whole debate. Like we could really step back and talk about like when you should schedule your draft, whether it's everybody having full information actually makes it fairer, or you want to build in advantages for people that anticipate things that are going to happen. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't think whether it's Garoppolo or Nick Chubb or Jacoby Brissett, I don't think we see Nick Chubb set up to surpass anything he's done before, the same way we might see that, say, with Michael Pittman, or Cortland Sutton, and that, I mean, the allure of the unknown. And I'm not going to knock anybody for taking Nick Chubb in the 3rd round. I think even when you get to the 4th round to me is really where it drops off a cliff at running back. I think you've got like Travis Etienne is still hanging around there in some drafts. Maybe Ezekiel Elliott falls there. And I guess that's a good one because, again, all the experience you have, I think there's one view on Ezekiel Elliott that I can't rid my mind of, which is like the cliff's coming. I don't know if it's coming this year, but it's coming. Maybe his knee injury last year was the first sign, but maybe his knee injury last year is what's concealing that he's still the same guy, and that you can get him in the 3rd or 4th round is absurd. Which of these roads would you nudge people to go down on Ezekiel Elliott this year?
Again, I would love to be in a situation where I don't have to make that call because I've already got running backs by the time I would be considering Zeke at his presumed draft position. His ADP is probably fair. I have him ranked right around where he's going, I would say. Like late 3rd, early 4th, that's probably right. That's fine. It's just, once again, if you haven't done the thought beforehand about what kind of choices you're going to have to make when you get beyond your first couple of picks, and you don't want to be faced with the Zeke Elliott conundrum, you realize that by going RB, wide receiver, you're setting yourself up to have to make the call on Zeke.
Yeah.
I think, you better be ready to make that call or not. Like, I think you probably do. I think you probably do at that point, and then you live and die with what that's going to be like. Like, we're drafting a big bundle of unknowns with every player, but with Zeke, he's got a lot of unknowns. He's got a lot of things that nobody's just, I called it last year. I thought his 2 years ago film was kind of crummy. And I didn't think he looked all that. He didn't have a sprained knee then. Maybe he's already over the cliff. Maybe he's just in a protracted slow motion fall. But I can honestly say for my own teams, I'm very much preferring not to have to make that call.
Right. I love that. And one of the other articles I'm going to put out in the next week or two, Chris, I call it the all Rolades team. Like, I'm relieved that someone else took them because I don't want to have to make that call. Right. And in some ways, having clarity about where you don't have clarity is important because you, again, can steer so that you don't end up. I think that's one of the things that can put you on tilt during a draft is whenever you get to one of those players that you don't have clarity on, and then you either take them and immediately regret it. Because isn't it always the moment that of truth? This is like a life thing, right? Only after the decisive moment do you have clarity. It never comes with the decision. It's interesting how we tap into our intuition that way, that when it's speculation, it's really difficult. And this is why you mentioned doing a lot of drafts. Actually doing drafts, whether it's underdog, best ball drafts, or mock drafts, or just being in a lot of leagues, a few that start early so you can see where people are. It gives you an idea. And I like how you phrase this as just anticipating, hey, these are the players or these are the zones in positions that I don't really want to have to dabble with. I want to steer away from those and let somebody else have to answer that question. And again, it's about running enough ideas and simulations so that as you don't end up in the woods during your draft, and you understand, oh, now that I've made these my first 3 picks, I have to know which tight end between tight end 6 and 10 I really like, or so on and so forth. So going back to the idea of doing a lot of drafts, give me another name or two that you just seem to find yourself selecting a lot.
I'm getting Kamara a ton because I'm willing to take him late first, early second. So I've Kamara everywhere. It's funny, like I'm pretty out on a limb on my Michael Thomas rank. I'm doing it's my All Saints league, and I'm doing really well because I get those 2 guys. No, but I'm really way out on a limb on my Michael Thomas rank. This new hamstring thing notwithstanding, maybe I'll wind up being scared by that, but we'll see. And yet I don't seem to get him that much. And maybe it's partly because I am often taking running backs early towards the back ends of these most recent drafts I've done. And it just doesn't work out that Thomas fits the area where I would take him. It's like I have him ranked like as a top 10 receiver, but I don't have to take him there. So I'm going to wait. But I anticipate that as we get through the last couple of weeks of August, I'll wind up with a ton of Thomas and probably less of Kamara, because I think you can tell me if you think this is wrong, but it seems to me that people are going to start coming around on Kamara and realizing, oh, well, if the suspension really isn't, is a much slighter worry than we originally thought, then there's really no reason why he can't do exactly what he did last year. And he therefore is obviously a first rounder in all leagues. It seems to me that his ADP will head up, whereas Thomas's, if anything, after hamstring news, will probably go down.
Yeah, well, it's almost like with Thomas, I think the last 2 years has made everybody want a reason to avoid him. Like, just give me a reason. And like you said, now there's the hamstring. I think Thomas could easily be a key to winning your league. And he himself pointed out when he had the ankle injury and was putting up numbers with Taysom Hill at quarterback with the same ankle injury we're worried about that has been surgically corrected. I mean, I think it's just a question of his head being on straight. And Jameis Winston has made a fantasy receiver or two into a star too. Yeah. So, I think the Saints are a really fun team to look at. I forget who it was. I think it was Thomas Emmerich, who does really good offensive line work. And one of the offensive lines that has complete continuity from last year is the New Orleans Saints. So that's a good place to start. And this was a pretty good offense. I know they lost Sean Payton. What was he doing throwing out the first pitch with Jay Glazer or something like that at a Diamondbacks game? Anyway, that's where's Sean Payton today, throwing out the first pitch at a Diamondbacks game. Okay. Anyway, Michael Thomas, I think the last time we saw him going into the season was the number one fantasy wide receiver. Last year was a little more difficult to forecast. I think DeAndre Hopkins also fits into this too. DeAndre Hopkins is one, like, if in leagues that I would be in, say with you, Chris, or other quote unquote experts, all of us fantasy experts, I think we can actually, maybe I'm going to start removing the air quotes from that, because we're really like an industry, I mean, really, I guess I should stop editorializing about the legitimacy of our occupation now. But in a typical home league or a local league, you can take DeAndre Hopkins and weather the storm of those 6 games out and get yourself a wide receiver we would have taken in the 3rd round, and just do a good job with waiver wire pickups and making sure that you take a few wide receivers later on, maybe a Chris Olave, speaking of Saints. With Kamara, going back to Kamara, this is one where I talk myself in circles, right? Because on one hand, we know what Kamara can do. This is going to be a better offense and so on. But the Saints love Mark Ingram. They love Mark Ingram. And on one hand, the way they used Mark Ingram last year, once he was added to the team, would be really frustrating for Alvin Kamara fantasy teams, because it was closer to the split they had back in the day when both running backs were every week starters. Ingram was a borderline running back one, and Kamara was a solid running back one. By the way, that's the Green Bay Packers backfield this year. But at the same time, when people will get into my mentions, as they do, Chris, and say, Ingram, we're worried about Mark Ingram. We're worried he's dust. He's nothing. If you're saying the reason to be hesitant about Kamara is Ingram, so it's tough, because we're talking about not rational usage of players, but at the same time, we're also talking about the way the football gods kind of see to it that these things straighten themselves out. But I wouldn't talk anybody out of building their team around Saints. I think they're under the radar as still very, very good. Even Jameis Winston, especially in your 2 quarterback superflex leagues and all that good stuff. So I'm with you on the Saints. Okay, going to the other side of the spectrum, Chris. From players that you end up drafting a lot, is there a player that you see going in these drafts you're doing and saying, I wouldn't even consider him for another round or 2? Thank you. You're doing me a favor by taking him.
Sure. A few. I mean, Kyle Pitts, I'm not going to take where he's going. Not really anything to do with Kyle Pitts himself. It's just, I'm always already waiting on tight end. And if I'm not waiting on tight end, I'm doing it for somebody who already is capable and has probably already multiple times delivered insane seasons, like, high level wide receiver 1 type seasons, and doing it proactively where I have to take Pitts, the opportunity cost of which would be taking a receiver who can give me exactly the number that Pitts can. If I do the expected value of that, of the likelihood that Pitts will do what people think he can do with the quarterback he has, never having done it before, like, figuring out that expected value is just, to me, significantly less than the receiver I can get at the same time, who is a Pittman or whoever, like a high level wide receiver 1 or high level wide receiver 2, low level wide receiver 1, depending on where Pitts is going. Um, and I get to remove a bunch of risk. And if you kind of think about the idea of value-based drafting, tight ends, to be worth where you're going to take the elites, they have to outperform the waiver wire guy, the average producer, by so much. Like last year, Travis Kelce did not justify his draft position. Mark Andrews did, but Travis Kelce didn't. And that's not a knock on Kelce. He had a good year, but just not a great year. And the average tight end, just like compared to what the average receiver is, the waiver wire receiver is just, there are a lot more receivers owned. So the threshold for being good for fantasy is just a lot easier for the elite receivers. So that's just a sort of a quasi mathematical way of saying, I don't want tight ends that early anyway, and I sure am not going to spend one on a guy who's never done it, who has Marcus Mariota thrown it to him.
Yeah, Pitts, it's so funny because, and this is on the couch, right? And in a lot of ways, this is my therapy for me. Thank you, everybody. And our failures, I don't want to say failures, that's so strong. Where we're wrong, because let's get it straight. I like to say that we're fake fortune tellers. We're pretending that we can predict the future, and we're going to be wrong a lot. And with Pitts last year, I just thought, here's somebody you're going to get at tight end who's going to be used like a wide receiver. And at least for some time, they're going to catch teams unaware. You had Arthur Smith, the first former tight end coach. But Matt Ryan is competent enough. They took him number 4 instead of trading down. They could have done a lot more. It was Terry Fontenot's first big decision as the GM of the Falcons. I thought this is going to be fireworks. And what happened was that teams treated Pitts like the most important threat on the field. And Calvin Ridley going out didn't exactly help things. So now we come full circle. His ADP is the same as last year, but he's a year more experienced. But like you said, there's Marcus Mariota as his quarterback. Drake London, I don't think is going to scare teams away from double teaming or otherwise focusing on Kyle Pitts. And I thought, I'm out on Pitts, and I'm probably out on Pitts. I don't think I'm going to have Pitts on very many of my teams, which is, and one of my cardinal sins as a fantasy football analyst of players, I'm often a year early on different things. And just as a thought exercise, Chris, I said, well, of course, and I know some people will think this is hyperbole, but I think in league circles, Calvin Johnson was a name that came up a lot in comparison to Pitts as the kind of way that he can tilt the field in a passing game. And I said, well, what did Calvin Johnson do in his second year? Oh, he broke out. Well, who was his quarterback? Oh, it was Dan Orlovsky and old Dante Culpepper and old John Kitna. So if Kyle Pitts is indeed Calvin Johnson, maybe the sheer wattage of his ability will overpower all these things. But I think you're right to point out value-based drafting. Joe Bryant, my partner here, leading us decades ago to the idea that the important thing is not the total number of points a player scores. It's how much more than the replacement level player, the 12th best player. And as I was writing up the draft day game plan today, Chris, it really occurred to me that tight end looks a little different than it usually does, right? Usually there's a big 3 or so. This year, unless you really think Darren Waller and George Kittle are just rotting on the shelf, there's a big 5 this year. And then usually after the big 3, there's maybe 1 or 2 or 3 names at the most that move the needle. And we're out in the wilderness by the time we get to tight end 9, tight end 10. This year, tight end 9 and 10 are guys like Zach Ertz.
They're fine.
And, I'm fine with that. Dallas Goedert. I'm fine with going. Dallas Goedert and George Kittle might end up being very similar this year. Their situations are very similar. Their talent, I mean, if you watch Goedert as a pass catcher. So now you have maybe 10 viable tight ends. If you think Dawson Knox is going to be viable, I think we're up to 10, Dalton Schultz, TJ Hawkinson. We're up to 10 viable tight ends now, right? And that means that it used to be, well, okay, you can get one of the big 3 tight ends, or you can just be like everyone else, scrounging around, hoping you get a touchdown and 3 catches from Jordan Thomas or whoever you throw in that week. But you're with a bunch of other people situated similarly to you. But this year, I think you might be giving up more if you just totally punt tight end. And also, who were some of the names that we liked outside of the top 10, like Noah Fant or Albert Okwuegbunam? I don't know. These guys aren't exactly rising in our rankings based on the preseason. So I think it's changing the idea of punting tight end. You might have less competition on the waiver wire because there are fewer teams that look at their tight end and say, I need to start off with someone and see what I can figure out. But also you're giving up more to teams that have better, more established tight ends. Now, you said wait on tight end. So I'm assuming that takes like that top 5 out of play. Who are your favorite names to look for when you wait at tight end?
I've gotten Waller a lot, I have to say. I've probably gotten Waller more than any other tight end, and I don't know, is he on the borderline of the top group?
I mean, in the 5th round, that's the thing. Like last year, TJ Hawkinson was a 4th round pick in tight end premium leagues, and Waller you see sometimes falling to the 4th round. So I think he is that threshold between a premium price that you pay and a reasonable price.
Yeah, I'm not taking him because I'm paying a premium. If I'm getting, It seems like I've gotten Waller because he's fallen out of the premium rounds. I'm getting Waller like 3 rounds after Pitts goes. I'm way later, and Pitts probably has more upside athletically and stuff, but he hasn't ever had a year like Waller had yet in the league. So I've been very happy with that. But if we're really getting out of the top, like Waller somewhere in the halfway point, Goedert's a great option. I love Goedert falling to me in the 8th or 9th or something like that. If I wait, there's a difference between waiting and punting. It seems to me that most teams are going to come out of most 12-team drafts with a tight end that they feel pretty comfortable with and not going to feel compelled to take a second one, certainly. And that can be good because it feels like you've got it shorn up, but it also could be a little shaky in that you're willing to stay married to a disappointing. I mean, Noah Fant wouldn't be in that group for me, but let's say Noah Fant was in that group. He was not usually your number 11 tight end, and he's the one you took, and you feel like, man, I waited on tight end, and I got my number 11 tight end, rock on. And maybe that means you wait a little too long to play the waiver wire game because you spend the month waiting for Noah Fant to go crazy. So I guess that could be like a little bit of a double-edged sword, but mostly it feels safer than ever just to not play that game. I've really never been the one who played the Kelsey game, and sometimes to my detriment, last year to my pleasure. But I understand it because, my God, I mean, who wouldn't understand it? And Mark Andrews after last year, it feels like buying at the top, but I could see it. I could understand why you'd do it in the 3rd round. I probably have him ranked right around there. But Pitts being the next guy and really close feels like one of these things are not like the other. I don't need to anticipate ceiling when there's ceiling staring me at the face in other positions right then.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that's really a good point. And I think that's another point, I think, Chris, that comes with the experience that you have. And again, I'm an emotional fantasy football player. I'm unflinchingly optimistic. And I think that from a fun standpoint, that's a fun way to play fantasy football. It might not help your win rates because, like you said, you're anticipating, you're wanting to move the line graph up to the next data point when more often than not, that allure, the unknown, doesn't pay off. Again, circling back to, this is all about me, right? Like being a year early on players, but there are players who already have demonstrated that ceiling. And I mean, I think a good example of this probably is someone like Saquon Barkley in the 2nd round. You talk about going running back early. Saquon Barkley's already demonstrated that top 3 to 5 running back ceiling. DeAndre Swift and Javonte Williams haven't. Now, I do think there's been a little more separation in ADP, but I think that's a good example of where, for some reason, people are more drawn to the promise of Swift or Williams getting to a level that Barkley has already demonstrated that he can get to. And it's a good way to put a check on yourself. We haven't talked much about quarterback yet. And again, I mentioned 2 quarterback superflex leagues. I always try to mention that because I think if you're just intellectually stimulated by the puzzle of fantasy football, it just makes leagues much more interesting when there are a quarterback that you have to start 2 quarterbacks and you don't just get to wait and get, Matthew Stafford as quarterback 13, but we still have to, for those classic 1 quarterback leagues, we're still giving people some sort of navigation, some sort of compass to find their way through that decision. And I think you were right to hit on many times in tight end. It's not so much punt. It's just, there's a lot of different points, like it's like exits off of the interstate, right? Just this is a good time based on the value and what the player presents, and you should probably be able to find one in the first 10 tight ends that you like. What about among the first 12, 13 quarterbacks? Where are you getting off the interstate?
So I get Brady a bunch. I get Russell Wilson a bunch. They're both really top 5 quarterbacks for me that just aren't drafted that way. So I don't feel the need to worry about which one I'm going to get. It just seems like those are the ones that have fallen to me. Um, I don't. I'm single redraft single quarterback leagues like Josh Allen going number 20. I tip my cap and I go, cool, that's great. Don't, that's not never what I'm going to do. And I'm not going to do it with Mahomes. I'm not going to do it with Herbert. And so I'm waiting. I've got all my starters at all of my other positions. I'm usually getting the tight end first 2, but not always. If I get Waller, then maybe not. And it just has seemed like Brady and Wilson have been really easy to snap up and just be like, cool, I've got probably 90% of Josh Allen, ish, and some weeks more. And I just didn't have to pay that price.
Yeah, I think you're right that the top quarterbacks, Allen, Herbert Murray, usually Lamar Jackson, just don't offer a big enough projected advantage over the next group of quarterbacks to be worth even taking them a round or 2 earlier than Brady or Wilson or Trey Lance or Jalen Hurts. I like that. I will say, if you like Jalen Hurts around quarterback 5 or 6, if you want to stick your neck out, because if they just pass a little bit more and get a little bit more efficient, I mean, it could be fun. It also could be that they don't get more efficient because of Jalen Hurts' limitations. But these are the probabilities we're talking about. Russell Wilson's fun because we have no idea what he can do when he's not having to row against a team philosophy that diminishes his importance in the game. It's fine. We could go and talk about specific player takes, and there's a lot of things that we need to be up on. There was a whole second week of the preseason to digest and process, and I feel like one of the things that's changed in the time that we've been in this, and I think you mentioned something about having a player that's ranked just about right, like Ezekiel Elliott. And I find, Chris, more often when I look at ADP, I'm nodding and saying, yeah, that's about right. That balances the risk and reward, the good and bad cases, the likelihood of everything just about right. And because the fantasy football space is so crowded now, and there's so many really smart people coming at it, each from their own experience and their own expertise and their own way of looking at these things, that the masses, if you will, have good information. It's no longer about an information edge, right? It's no longer about, I'm going to give you the really super special, amazing information that nobody else has. It's, I think fantasy football has been more about personalities and feeling like a kinship with different people, or the way they go about their business, or like a community. And because of that, in some ways, Chris, Joe Bryant and I were talking about this recently. It circles all the way back around that for us oldsters, if we just keep doing what we were doing, it makes us stand out more, right?
Yeah.
So I guess I'm going to use that as a jumping off point. I mean, we're not totally off the rails yet. It's 33 minutes, and everybody knows Chris Harris and Harris football and all the good stuff you're going to get from there. You already know that. You know what I mean? So everybody knows that there's going to be like high quality information and analysis, and presented in an entertaining and interesting and stimulating way. But I do want to ask you, because I think you've been doing this maybe even longer than I have. And I want to ask you, I guess I'm asking these questions of all the oldsters now, okay? What's your favorite thing about how the fantasy football space has changed during the time that you've been in
it? Well, during the time I've been in it, I mean, I've been in it, but since before it really exploded,
right?
Accidentally. So I guess what I like best is just that there's a hell of a lot more people consuming it, and it's just a bigger business, and it's easier for me to get an audience and stuff like that. I think a lot of what's come in the last 5 or 6 years has felt more negative than positive, to be honest.
I was going to get there. Yeah.
But I think the difference, like, there's a pretty big line of demarcation in my personal career, where 7 years, whatever, I was at ESPN, and then now 7 years I've been on my own. So it's like that perfect halfway point. And the first 7, it felt like, being on a wave of something that was getting bigger, that I had liked playing myself for a long, long time. And that was really fun. And these last 7 have been way more fulfilling professionally, just because I get to do totally my own thing. And so I've had way more fun these last 7 years, but the space itself, as it's gotten more crowded, it does feel like it's gotten a lot more noisy.
Yeah. Well, it's just sometimes I feel like, what is there to say that somebody else hasn't already said? Or
Yeah.
what angle is there? What insight? What way? I go back to my days as a philosophy major, where you learn a certain apparatus of analysis of something, and it's almost like this. It's like the block of marble or something, where if you tap it just right along this spot, it just splits into two and reveals itself. And I think so many people are doing so many different angles and ways to do that with fantasy football that I don't have a lot to add to that. And I think there's also a lot more gamifying. It was so simple, Chris, when we started. It was just make content and hopefully it's good. And if it's good, people will want to consume it, and then make more of it and make them happy, and you'll be happy and they'll be happy. And now it's gamified. Now there's shortcuts and wormholes and all these different things to build audiences that don't necessarily have to do with the quality of content or whether your voice is compelling, but whether you know how to play the game, because of that layer that exists between us and the people who like to consume what we do. As an offshoot of that, I'll ask you this: has your audience changed during the time that you've been doing Harris football? Have you found yourself changing? Has that relationship changed?
I probably am the thing that's changed the least. I'm just the same old fuddy-duddy, watching every game and talking about each. I'm the film guy, whatever that means. But that hasn't changed. I've watched every game, all the way through. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. That's what I do. The audience has gotten bigger, and that for that I'm very pleased. It's the sweetest group, and it started out that way. It started out like really supportive because I was leaving a big media company, didn't have any idea what to do, how to build a thing. And the people who were early adopters of my show were like mega supportive. It's how these crazy mixtapes, and you have a walk up song now on my show that you got played. Like,
what's up, Jesse?
It's how all these guys and gals started to send in songs that they made and took dumb things that I said and turned them into hats. We got the yacht possum hat. That, as the show got bigger, that core group of people who were really like sensitive and sweet and kind of recognized the folly of predicting what's going to happen in an NFL game as like any kind of sure thing is still there. But the bigger it gets, the more you kind of get a little like more casual fan who is trying to consume 7 podcasts a day. So they listen to you at 3x speed.
2 times speed. Oh, 3 times speed now. See, I'm behind.
I don't even know. Yeah. And like, I got love. I'm glad they listen. That's awesome. But you can tell when you're interacting on social media or via email or whatever with someone who's been with you and really digs what you do and your overall gestalt, as opposed to somebody who's just like, tell me what to do. Tell me the answer. Why isn't this guy doing this? Why would you have this guy ranked this way? I'm distinguishing this as 2 separate kinds of listeners. They're not. There's an overlap. People can be both. People can be neither. But I certainly, since the show has gotten bigger these last few years, get a little more interactions of those kinds, which are a little more generic, a little more like the ESPN days, a little more perfectly fine and very, very happy to have them. But like, it doesn't tug at my heartstrings quite the same way.
Yeah, I feel you on both of those things. And I feel you on wanting to serve everybody the best we can. And the sweetness, the way that people genuinely touch us. I wonder sometimes, I'm always like 3 degrees away from a Charles Bukowski line, which I know going back to like discovering Bukowski when I was in college, he's problematic. There's so many things that are problematic now, but there's still some things I take with me. I think there was, Bukowski was, I don't want to say ugly, but he was not attractive. And I think there was a point in one of his books where they would ask him like, oh, how do you always have a woman? How do you always have a woman? And he says, well, because they know I'll be here. And I kind of feel like that's us, right? Like, people know we're going to be here, right? They know that every football season we're going to be here. We're going to be talking to you. We're going to be experiencing things with you and sharing these experiences. And that in and of itself, I think I just feel like there's so much loneliness in our society. And I think that alone, I also come back to the way that there's the wonderful emerging female audience. And I don't ever want to be a gender essentialist or anything like that. But I think for males, it's not as easy to make lasting friendships or feel connection or have a space where you feel in fantasy football chats or even emails I've gotten from people when they'll be vulnerable and actually say things they're feeling that maybe again, we're not necessarily always have the most emotional intelligence, but in the fantasy football space, there's a sense of it's a safe space to express yourself. And it's fun. It's fun that we continue to knock around this. And again, always nodding the cap to all the people that make it possible. I'm going to get to the yacht possum. I do want to ask you, because like you said, you watch every game. And I know that as you go through the season, that's an incredibly important thing. But even just that you've done that helps ground you for this part of the fantasy football calendar when we're planting our flags and things. What's something that and I'm really going to say no, because you've watched every game, that the rankings just aren't factoring in, and that it's just low-hanging fruit. It's an easy layup for people, because if they had just watched the games, they would know this, and they wouldn't be stuck following the ADP or following what people are doing that haven't watched the games.
I think if you'd watched every Detroit Lions game, you wouldn't be as enthusiastic about Amon-Ra St. Brown as you are. I think it was a feeling of like, okay, I guess we'll just keep throwing screen passes to this guy since we suck and doesn't matter really what happens and we don't have anybody else. And I didn't find on film, I didn't find him to be like a particularly like essential player. I found him to be like he's not a killer. He's not like a crazy route runner. He's not like super, super great after the catch or like quick or anything like that. I think he's a good, fine, like ancillary slot type player. If he turns out to be Golden Tate at his best, or if he turns out to be Doug Baldwin at his best, then I will eat my yacht possum hat. But I don't see that in his rookie year. I mean, maybe that's not fair. He's only played 1 year. Maybe he's about to get way better. But again, since one theme seems to be in our conversation here that I want to have seen it and I want to have kind of believed it before I'm willing to assign you starter fantasy value or sort of extreme fantasy value. Amon-Ra St. Brown didn't prove it to me enough last year. And if he's about to go do it again, I'm easily going to tip my cap and tell somebody else in my league, nice job, while I drafted a guy who I do believe it and has done it before in a situation where everybody wasn't hurt, yada, yada, yada. It felt like really like compiling and a good, like a healthy offense should not be throwing it to that guy 12 times a game.
Yeah, I think similar ADP range. Well, Deontay Johnson's going around earlier, but they're a similar archetype of player. Chris Godwin,
they're so dissimilar as players. I mean, Johnson's an outside player, an incredible route runner, open in a phone booth. I just haven't seen it from St. Brown.
Right. Well, I guess what I mean is the way that Johnson was used last year for the Steelers and the way that St. Brown was used. And hopefully, speaking of on the couch, I always have a Steelers disclaimer about my Homer neurosis. I may be ever so slightly getting a little bit more optimistic because of what Kenny Pickett is doing. We'll see. But I want someone to be able to unlock that outside downfield receiver part of Deontay Johnson's game that Ben Roethlisberger wasn't able to. Amon-Ra St. Brown. It's funny. Amon-Ra St. Brown and Gabriel Davis were the two players. I don't know. We need to check out because we're so tuned in. But February and March, right off the bat, those are the players where people were digging in. Right off the bat. I mean, those are the two players where there was true polarization in the fantasy football world about how these players were going to do. And I think in both cases, it comes down to, were these signs of an imminent breakout at the end of the season valid, or were, like you were describing with St. Brown, perhaps just consequential or circumstantial and not because of the things contained by the player? And there's arguments on both sides. And we may be right and wrong, like at different points in the season when you tune in, be like, yep, Amon-Ra St. Brown's not doing very much because this is the narrow way that he's used, and TJ Hawkinson's doing well, and DJ Chark is doing well, and DeAndre Swift is doing well, so they just don't need to use him as much. But then if there's an injury, or if otherwise they're playing like a really tough defense that takes away some of those things, and Amon-Ra St. Brown has 12 catches for 130 yards, and all of a sudden now we come back around. It's what makes this fun. It's what allows us to keep doing this, Chris, right? Because if it was so easy to figure it out and it was so easy to say, then, well, the space wouldn't have grown like it has. And it's fun. It's fun because we get to examine things. All right, whatever. 15 minutes left. I'm going to go, we can go off the rails for real now, because you said it, you have the yacht possum hat. And I know that for the folks that are members of your community, yes. I mean, it's just great because it's like two words that you don't usually hear next to each other. But I think it also ties back into what you were saying about people being sweet and community and people hanging out with us. So yacht possum, explain.
Oh, God. I mean, it's so dumb that I feel embarrassed to have brought it up. I'm embarrassed I wore the hat, but it's funny. So I'm in LA right now. When you were on my show last week, I was in Massachusetts. I'm sort of bi-coastal. I'm in LA for the season. And when I first made that decision, 2018, and I said, "Hey, everybody, I'm talking to you from LA." And somebody wrote, I do like a mailbag on the show every so often, and somebody wrote in and say, "Well, now that you're in your second home, now that you're on your yacht,"
yeah,
and it just became funny that I live on a yacht, which obviously you can see I do. I live,
one of the Russian oligarchs' yachts, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, the show's been good.
Discount.
To me. Yeah. The possum thing happened for, oh my God, such a stupid reason. Do you really want to hear the reason?
That's it actually what makes it interesting.
It might tie into your fun facts about possums that you're going to give us. So I went to trivia with Nick Durazzo. If Nick is watching, he's a friend of mine here in LA. And we got an answer wrong. And it was like, what are the 5 mammals in North America that have the highest incidence of rabies or something like that? It might not have been rabies. I don't know. But like, I subsequently learned that possums actually fight rabies, not carry rabies. But we answered incorrectly possum. Okay. We were mad. We lost the trivia. The next morning, Andy Behrens was my guest on the show, and I've known Andy for 25 years. And so we decide to, whenever he's on, we talk for like a half an hour beforehand. And he's like, hey, what's up? And I said, I'm really mad. He said, why? I said, because we lost trivia last night. Would you have gotten this right? Asked him the question. He didn't even answer. He just went, I bleeping hate possums. Like he had this visceral hatred of possums. So I said, this is funny. Let's hit record. So I hit record and we did his intro, and he gave like a 10-minute screed against why possums are the worst thing in the world. And that brought the possum lobby out of the woodwork on Twitter.
Is a possum lobby. Yes,
absolutely. Like Andy and I still get tagged on possum tweets, definitely once daily, often like 20 times a week, because of this one segment. And so then it became part of the lore of the show that the reason I was very indulgent of possums is that I actually have my best friend is a possum who lives on the yacht with me.
Yeah, there you go. Well, and what's funny is possums, I mean, let's face it. And right now, and I tweeted out a picture of 3, by the way, for people who are keeping up with it. Now we have 4 baby turtles. Nice. We have box turtles, and they finally had babies. It's a long story. We've moved a couple of times. We weren't able to really give them a big, nice space until we bought this place in the Tremy here in New Orleans. And now we have baby turtles, and it's just incredible. The miracle of life, which is really about the conceit of humans, right? Because nature, like Mother Nature, can make life happen anywhere easily as long as we aren't meddling with it. And then we do it and we say, wow, look at us. We have baby turtles. But there are some animals that just aren't, they're not cute, right? They're not, you know what I'm saying? They're not.
You're tempting big possum right now.
Well, because I've already. So Chet Gresham, who's a great.
I know Chet.
And Chet is. I often ask Chet questions to help out my wife, who's a true classic love of my life. She's a Earth mama. Like she has a true green thumb for lots of things, humans too. Just helping people heal and grow and just all those good things, which don't necessarily come naturally to me. And Chet has been a great resource for lots of things with like our garden and all kinds of different things we can do. And possums just, they're nocturnal. They have this sort of blank look. They scurry away. And I thought, well, possums, they hiss, and I asked Chet, I said, what's good about possums? He said, oh, there's lots of good things about possums. But most importantly is that they take ticks they eat the ticks,
Right.
and because of the temperature of their blood, their marsupials, the ticks can't really harm them, and they just like little snacks for them, and they break the chain of Lyme disease and really help us. We do joke about, because my wife's uber aware of ticks, although we just found out that maybe the ticks down here don't carry Lyme disease like they do in other parts of the country, so maybe it'll help her relax a little bit. But there's lots of vacant lots in New Orleans, newsflash, where they're overgrown, and we call them tickopolises or tick bills. But we joke about her taking a pet possum around to eat the ticks. So
I'll ask my guy whether he knows anybody in New Orleans.
right. No, it's great. You mentioned trivia, and there's a lot of directions we could go with trivia. Trivia's fun. I have to think there's a lot of overlap between people who love Trivial Pursuit when it first came out, and people like go to trivia nights, and people who play fantasy football. Meaningless knowledge, right?
Yeah,
trivia.
Right.
But I do want to ask you, because didn't you tweet out your championship-winning softball team recently? Because that's another pursuit. So unpack that for us, because it's funny. My stepson's been playing baseball, and I've told him about adult softball leagues, beer leagues, right? That you can keep playing when you're an adult, and it can be a lot of fun. And you had a wound to show what you gave for the championship.
Still have it.
Have
it on my knee. It hurts.
It hurts more the older we get, right? And it hurts for longer. But softball. Talk about your relationship with softball.
Yeah, I have a team. So I spend Massachusetts summers, where I lived for when I was at ESPN, and before that, even when I went to MFA school to get the creative writing degree, I got a place in Emerson. I've always had it, and so I go back in the summer, and I'm on a team. Actually, it's in the same league. This was a new team for me this year, but they're like a legendary team in the league, the Truculent Turkeys. And we did win. It's co-ed beer league softball. It's fun. I'm the pitcher, and it was big fun, and we won the championship. It was quite.
What's the most important thing about fielding your position as a pitcher in a softball league?
I was a hockey goalie. Ice hockey goalie. That's the best thing about it. Is basically, if you have good reaction time, you can be a pretty decent pitcher fielder, because you get some liners up the middle.
See, now this is really turning into an On the Couch episode, Chris. Because if you had the disposition to want to be a hockey goalie, did you want to be a hockey goalie, or was it something that was foisted upon you?
I think I didn't play like in youth hockey. It was more at an undergrad. It's when I learned how to play, and I kind of wanted to do it. It was fun.
Yeah. So it wasn't daunting to you to have the idea of people shooting this hard object at you at speed, trying to hit it as hard as they can at you. That's kind of like being a fantasy football analyst, right? People that are going to take their shots at us. We have to take those shots, but it's okay. We put ourselves out in line fire. Amherst, Northampton is fantastic. The Berkshires, like the whole area is fantastic, by the way. It's one of the better kept. I think that whole region, because I went to Syracuse, and there's the Adirondacks, and there's that Lake George, Lake Champlain area, that whole area of the country, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. It's really one of the better kept secrets, especially summers, right? That's when everything comes alive and everybody is. It's like when the summers are that different than the winters, you get all you're living in during the summer, like your softball leagues. Although then you
go to LA.
Then you go to LA, right? Well, it's funny, because it really dawned on me this last week or so that the summers in New Orleans are so terrible, and the original aristocrats who settled it, they just went to the North Shore, the other side of the lake. I think Calvin and Hobby lives up there. Mandeville's a great place, and it's kind of like the same way the winters cause living things to hibernate. The summers kind of do that here, right? I mean, you just find a shady place, like when you see a dog laying under a car during the summer. That's kind of like what we all find cars to lie under, and then we come back alive for the winter. That's when everything really gets going here. Another thing I've got to ask you about, I think this is becoming like a tradition too, because I think one of the times we had on was maybe right after one of your books came out, but you're working on another book. And I just want to, it's cool to talk to a fantasy football analyst who's also working on a book.
Well, thanks. I came on your show last year and probably talked about working on the same book, in fact, because I've been working on the same novel since 2019 now. But I think next year I'm going to finish it. I told you that when we were talking on my show, before my show. I've got committed now that I said it out loud. I think I'm going to finish it. It's long. It's longer than my longest so far. This is my 5th novel. Fortunate have had 4 published. The first one, like from 10 years ago or so, is about an NFL player. So if people are interested in just reading like literary fiction about an NFL player, do you know End Zone by Don DeLillo?
I don't know that book. I know his work,
Okay.
but I don't know that book. Yeah.
Right. So that's a college football novel that he wrote early in his career. And I'm not going to say I didn't rip it off. I'm also not going to say I did rip it off. I'm going to say, I mean, if you like that book, you might like my book. I'm just going to say it's exactly the same book, word for word. It's not. But this one is about projecting life in about 30 years. It takes place in 2050. It's a big, long, involved thing about what America turns into in 2050, which we can get into if you want.
Oh, that's what we should have started with. That you should have said fantasy football drafts. We need to talk about what America's turning into. That's the show everybody really needs, right?
Yeah. So it's been fun / depressing to write, and it's a long, involved story about trying to imagine sort of what the technology is like. That part's kind of fun, and then also it's about whether or not a pill exists that helps you not be afraid of dying, and people are very interested in getting their hands on that.
Yeah, it's perfect, right? You mentioned Don DeLillo. I think especially when the pandemic hit, I was reminded, was it White Noise, I think, where there was some environmental event. But the idea being that nobody really knew, were they affected by it? Were they not affected by it? Did they get away quickly enough? There's things they need to be doing. You're
It's a
taking the
movie.
word. Right. Oh, I haven't seen the film.
No, it has not out yet. Adam Driver's in it. He's the star.
Oh, wow.
It's coming out. It's a big release. They spent a lot of money on it. So it's like one of those rare non-franchise movies that got a pretty big budget. And so everybody goes see White Noise when it comes out. But yeah, the airborne toxic event, I believe, is what you're talking about.
Well, and it's more about the way that it from a psychological, emotional, spiritual point of view, puts you on shaky ground. Where you thought you were on solid ground, now you're on shaky ground. Maybe you're on shaky ground. It's like Wile E. Coyote. Maybe you're on shaky ground all along. You just finally looked down and noticed it.
Right.
But it's interesting. I was just going back and forth with Pat Doherty. I love Pat. I love Pat.
He was on my show today. He's okay. I mean,
yeah. Well, you have to make some allowances and I said at least the post-apocalyptic dystopic movies of our youth of the 70s prepared us for the future. They actually did. I'm thinking of like Philip K. Dick and all the Philip K. Dick books. I almost think Philip K. Dick, if he was alive today, would say, geez, I wasn't paranoid enough. I and that's why I say, like, if you're projecting America 30 years into the future, you don't know this yet, Chris, but you're actually writing a book about America 10 years in the future.
Maybe it's possible. My most recent book, the one that most people have read, if they've read a book of mine, is called Tulsa, and that is like a post-apocalyptic book. All the electricity goes off, and nobody knows why. And now it's like several months later, and it's like a very close-up story about that. So who knows? I think I may have said this on your show. If I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry, but in the like dedication of it, I dedicated the book to a couple people, and then I said also to the world for not turning into this yet. And it came out like a couple years before COVID, and then it kind of turned into that a little bit, but hopefully we're bouncing back, baby.
Well, it's always the struggle and the suffering that creates the overcoming, right? I don't know. Really, I should have started off the rails right from the beginning, because there's too much. I mean, I've got to wind up the show, but this is where the real rich vein of what everybody's thinking about and feeling, and it's very open-ended right now. But again, this comes back to why we play fantasy football, because that's peace. Sundays for football. It's peace,
and
connection with other people, and that's always what keeps us coming back. And it's outstanding. It's outstanding that here we are here in the year 2022, and this is a nice big excuse for us to get to hang out and be parts of each other's lives in a positive way, like so many people have been for Chris Harris, like Chris Harris has been for so many people, like you all are for me and Footballguys and for our whole fantasy football community. Everybody, thank you as always. It's a privilege. It's a pleasure to serve. And I got to go look up this White Noise film project. 2008, the financial crisis really killed the film industry as far as emerging interesting things. But now that I know they've turned that into a book, there's hope, although it's a depressing one. So what's never depressing is spending time with all of y'all and talking and hanging out and thinking about football. As always, y'all are the best and you are the classiest.